Years ago, a buddy from school asked me if I wanted to play tennis. Now, I hadn't played tennis in years, but I did when I was growing up. And I thought, okay, this will be a blast. So we went, suited up, and started playing. But as we got into it, I noticed that he was great. He was crushing me every shot and then game after game. And no matter what I was trying, he was just devastating me. And it was completely demoralizing after a certain point. At first, it was fun, but then it just got frustrating. And I was trying everything I could think of to win even a shot, and nothing worked. And I kept looking up, and there he was laughing. And then a thought occurred to me. And in that moment, I changed my approach and everything changed. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what that thought was, how it impacted my game, and really how it's impacted the way I approach learning things, the way I approach my career, and different aspects of my life. And we'll also look at how that particular principle shows up in the way that Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and Richard Branson approach their careers. So let's get into it. So what does playing tennis have to do with Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and Richard Branson? What I noticed is the thought that hit me that day, I believe, is the same thing that these three people use in navigating their career. So what happened? Like I said, anything I tried wasn't working. And then I paused for a moment, and this thought came into my head. And what it was one of my early martial arts masters had offered me a perspective, which was never play somebody else's game. In other words, don't fight the other person's fight. Set the parameters for the game that you're playing and make them fight your fight. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. I noticed that the whole time that I was playing this guy, I was running around trying to match his shots. I was running around trying to catch up to his pace and his orientation to the game. So I took this idea and I thought, you know what? I'm going to have him play my game. It was my turn to serve, and I paused, and then I took a different approach. So what was this different approach? The idea is to think about, how do I want to view the landscape of whatever it is that I'm pursuing? Now let's look at these three amazing examples in business. And I'll start with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was in a very crowded industry. He was a forerunner. He could have looked at what was going on in the industry and tried to compete with what was there. But that isn't what he did. Instead, he stopped and he thought, how would I create the industry? What do I think a computer should look like? It's very interesting. If you look at computers at the time compared to early Apple computers, and the same thing when he got into smartphones, the competition's versions of things very often had more functionality, offered more flexibility, and were, much more customizable. But that wasn't what Steve Jobs was going after. He was trying to create an ecosystem where somebody with little experience could navigate that world very easily. Instead of offering more features, he sought to scrape away anything that wasn't necessary. And very often he would only give you one way to do something. The early mouse was very simple. Navigation was incredibly clear and intuitive. So that was his goal. When it came to the first iPhone, everybody asked him to put in a stylus, and he said, I don't like having a stylus. Everyone told him to put in a keyboard. He didn't want a keyboard. He wanted the keyboard on the screen, and everyone said it wouldn't work, but he had a strong vision of how he wanted this to develop over time and what he felt the world needed, or what he felt the world would want. Instead of looking at the landscape and trying to figure out how you fit in, instead, step back and think, how do I want the world to be? What are the rules that I want to play by? So let's look at Elon Musk now. So Elon Musk came into this industry. I'll just look at the electric car. He came into the industry. Again, everybody said it couldn't be done. There was a standard way of making cars. There weren't stations for charging an electric car. And he ignored all of that and just went ahead to create his own ecosystem, reinventing a car from scratch in many ways and putting together a whole new way of a new experience of driving, the look and feel of the car, the experience of charging. And in many cases, he was able to exceed what was possible with normal gas cars. So again, he really recreated the industry. Same thing with spaceflight. People said that, nobody could get into commercial spaceflight. He begged to differ. So he went and he started studying spaceflight on his own, got in touch with the smartest people, and again decided to pave his own path. Let's look at Richard Branson for a second. Richard Branson has done essentially the same thing many times in his career, but we'll look at the example of him starting Virgin Airways. He was so incredibly frustrated with flight, with British Airways in particular, and the way that I heard the story, he was trying to get a flight, I believe it was delayed or canceled, and he thought this isn't the way that customers should be treated. So what he did is he went and chartered a plane, put up a sign that said Virgin Airways, and started selling tickets right on the spot. And that was the beginning of his experience with running an airline. And with Richard Branson, he asked the question of how does he want the world to be? And he really asked it from the perspective of his customers. What's a world that the customers would be excited to participate in? And so again, he's not interested in playing anyone else's game. He's not even curious about that. He just wants to know what would make a pleasurable experience, whether it's in flight or with music, or now with cruises, and also with space flight. So what can we learn from these three people? There are a few things that I take away from it. The first is just this general principle of don't play the other person's game. Don't worry about the landscape as it is. Instead, begin to ask yourself, what's the world that I want to live in? What do I want to explore here? What do I find interesting? What's the world that you want to grow into? What's the world that you want to create for yourself? And all the assumptions that come in a field, and question everything. This, again, is Jobs questioning the need for a stylus or the need for a physical keyboard on a mobile phone. It's Elon Musk questioning the need for gas and questioning the idea that you can't have pump stations to charge your car. It's, Elon Musk and Richard Branson questioning the idea that you can't have commercial space travel. Really questioning assumptions is a rich landscape for creating something new. Now, what are some of the areas that this might be useful for you? Like I mentioned earlier, this is something that I think about when I'm learning a skill. When I'm learning something like music or martial arts, I do want to pay attention to history and kind of best practices, and I love being a sponge for learning new things. But at the same time, these days, I try to ask the question earlier about how do I want to orient to that activity? What's important to me? What am I going for? Rather than always looking for cues from everyone else about the right way to do things. In the context of a job, again, I would look at, okay, what are the ways that people do things here? But also, what is it that I can do? What's my unique strength or talent that I can bring to the situation that perhaps other people aren't taking advantage of? I find that in companies, people pay attention to protocol, in my opinion, way too often, instead of staying focused on achieving things. People are always looking for what's the right way to do this, or what's the way in this company's culture, instead of asking for what could be a better way, what could be an innovative way. And this is also true in navigating kind of the landscape of your career. People always think, okay, I have to apply to a job by getting on LinkedIn or filling out a job application, something like that. And what I found over the years is the people who do things completely the opposite of that are the ones whose careers accelerate. Instead of asking what's the way that I need to go for a job, what's the way that I need to apply, what would be amazing, and heading directly in that direction. But having an idea of where you want to get to is an incredibly powerful way for you to begin navigating that landscape. So I hope you find this idea useful for you in your life, asking the question of, how can I play things with my rules? How can I play my game versus someone else's? The time that I usually know that it's time for me to do this is when I feel like I'm trying to play catch up, when I'm looking around too much, trying to figure out the right way to do things, In those moments, I pause and say, okay, that's great. I understand that there may be a way that things have been done, but then I want to ask myself, how would I create this if I was doing it from scratch? And then I'll go from there. So here's what happened in the tennis match. I decided that it was time for David to play by my pace. So I served, and I always picked a place on the court and made him chase after my shots. I kept changing up the pace of the game, and he started running around and trying to return what I threw at him. Now it was just one game, but I beat him point after point after point. And it was very interesting. He started getting very upset and started swearing, and I won that game. And actually at the end of the game, he got so upset that he smashed his racket and broke it. It was a powerful learning for me. I enjoyed winning at least one game that day. And then I had a great principle to take with me elsewhere. So I'm linking a couple of videos related to this. I hope you find this useful and look forward to seeing you next time.